All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Accelerating FinTech Applications at Scale. My name is Matt Brown, and I'll be your moderator. Before we begin, just a few logistical reminders. Today's discussion is being recorded, and you are currently in listen-only mode. You may submit questions throughout the session using the Q&A functionality in the lower right-hand corner of your console. We'll try to answer everyone's question after the presentation, provided we have time. After today's webinar, you will receive an email with the recording. If you wish to contact us, please email us at team@singlestore.com. Let me introduce our speakers today. First, we've got Vijay, Senior Director of Product Marketing at SingleStore, who will be facilitating the conversation. And then our three customer panelists, Colin Hall, Co-founder and Engineering Director at Spacetime.io, Jerry Morgan, Lead Developer at DailyVest, and Michael Zimberg, Chief Technology Officer at Digital Asset Research. Gentlemen, welcome. We're excited to have you, and we're excited to talk about your FinTech database journeys, use cases, challenges, and achievements thus far. Vijay, you now have the floor.
Great, awesome. Thank you, Matt, and welcome again, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Very exciting session today, and very happy to have three leaders from the fintech industry joining us today. As Matt mentioned, my name is Vijay Raja. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing here at SingleStore. And you know, it's exciting to have some of the most amazing leaders in fintech in the same platform today to tell us about their use cases, about their journey, and how they're providing compelling value propositions back to their customers. Now, if you look at the fintech segment or space today, this is one of the most disruptive sectors in the industry. The fintech market overall is projected to grow to about $324 billion by 2026, and a global adoption rate of 25%. And we already see that with increasing focus on things like embedded finance, banking as a service, crypto trading. We're already starting to see the momentum build up. And just to put things in perspective, here are two stats that you might want to think over, right? Number one stat is over 88% of incumbent financial institutions believe that part of their businesses will be lost to standalone fintech companies in the next 5 years. 88% of incumbents feel that. And I'll give you another stat. Can you imagine the amount of funding that's being pumped into fintech today? So just last year in 2021, over $130 billion of funding went into fintech, right? And that's like a 170% year-over-year growth in terms of the amount of funding and amount of innovation that's happening in the fintech space. Just shows you the momentum and the pace at which disruption is happening in the fintech space today. But the key thing is, for fintech, it's all about data. Data is the engine, data is the oil, data is the new bacon, right? And fintech applications are obviously powered by data. They are extremely data intensive. And what I mean by data intensity is like, it requires a combination of fast ingestion. You're looking at real-time analytics, the ability to process diverse types of data sets in a blazing fast manner, right? Support for high concurrency and for support for easy scalability as your operations grow. And SingleStore today has a number of customers in the fintech space who are powering some of the most compelling use cases, including everything from real-time trading engines, embedded finance, crypto exchanges, financial data exchanges, consumer lending, payment processing, so on and so forth. And that's what makes this really interesting. And today we are really excited to have leaders from three leading customers who are disrupting the status quo in the fintech space. So Colin, Michael, and Jerry, great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. And with that, let's get started. So Michael, I want to get started with you. Can you give us a quick overview of digital asset research which segment of the market you guys focus on, and what does the platform enable users to do?
Sure, great to be here. Thanks for the intro. So digital asset research provides institutional quality market data on digital assets. So that's an especially hard thing given that there are no standards in the industry, and also given that it's a 24/7 space with extremely high volume. So there's no standard way to refer to anything. And for those that are new to the crypto space, something like Bitcoin is not always called Bitcoin. Even within one exchange, it can be called BTC, but then when it's part of a pair, it could be BTXCUR. So we provide golden source reference data to allow institutional firms, so our customers include pricing providers like Bloomberg and Refinitiv, fund accountants, fund administrators, and some of the largest hedge funds to quickly connect to exchanges and be able to transact with some of these assets. We also provide pricing based on data science that can filter out a lot of the trades in the market that could potentially be market manipulating. So when you think about order of magnitude, it's in the order of hundreds of millions of trades a day in the crypto universe, hundreds of thousands of assets. And you think about trying to handle all of that in a concurrent, scalable way. SingleStore is instrumental in letting us to provide this info to clients. So right now we're at 2,000 assets. We're probably going to be growing pretty quickly to around 1 million assets that we price. So these are largely fungible tokens that we price today, and we're going to be getting into the non-fungible token space, and we actually are already partially there. We consume 140 million trades a day, and these are being institutionalized through our partnership with FTSE, and we've got 450 of them that have CDOLs assigned. We have a pretty rich history, as you can see, with 60 billion historical trades and 2 billion historical prices. So those are a lot of real-time prices, some reference rate prices, and for some of the assets going fairly far back. So we have Bitcoin, for example, back to 2011. One of the other things we're able to do with all this rich data set is provide asset vetting. So we do data science, and we can do things like network analysis as providers of tokens are thinking about listing on other layer ones. But it's a rich data set and kind of a lot to tie together, so keeps us pretty busy.
We can see that like a million plus crypto assets pricing and cryptocurrency pricing in real time. So that is definitely an interesting and a growing space that you guys are in. So thank you, Michael. I want to switch to Jerry. Can you give us a little bit of an overview around Daily Vest, where you guys focus on, and then what does this platform enable customers to do?
Thank you, Vijay. Yes, what we do at Daily Vest is we provide an analytics platform for analyzing retirement plans. Our customers are financial service providers like Charles Schwab, for example. And what they do is they give us data so that we can help to improve their retirement plan health and performance by providing analytics. We take two types of data from each of our customers, mostly on a monthly basis. Some of our customers upload data more frequently. One type of data is investment data, in other words, financial transactions. And the other type of data is census data, that's to say information about the plan participants, like their age, their participant status, their employment status, that sort of thing. What this allows our customers to do is to gain insight into this vast amount of data that they have, providing them with nuggets of information through dashboards and an interactive user interface as well. So these are the types of analytics that we provide. You know, what our customers want to know is they have questions like who's contributing, which contributors are actually participating. If not, why are they not participating? Are there any patterns to this? If we look at one particular retirement plan, are things getting better or are they getting worse? So we provide analysis over time. And we also provide analysis across plans. So we can say, if this plan is looking good, is it still good when you compare it to other similar plans, or does it seem to pale a little compared to how the others are doing? So we provide that kind of analysis. And what SingleStore helps us with is, we moved from SQL Server a couple of years ago, and the problem we were having was one of the problems we were having was that the performance was not really quite as good as what we're seeing on SingleStore. So SingleStore has allowed us to provide more depth to our analytics by doing a lot more pre-processing after the ingestion of the data. And that allows us to do the kind of cross-plan analysis that really we were starting to do with SQL Server, but we've really been able to roll it out to a much greater extent now that we've switched to SingleStore.
Very, very, very interesting. So retirement planning and performance and insights for providers and planning teams. That's awesome. Hey, Colin, I want to switch to you and just hear a little bit more about spacetime.io. Where do you guys focus on? What segment of the market you guys focus on? And then what does your platform enable users to do?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So what we do at Spacetime is we focus primarily on institutional traders that are working in the equity space, primarily in North America, looking to branch out to other geographies around the world over time. And what we do is we provide benchmarking and analysis of the execution of the trades those traders are putting into the market against the market as a whole. So the reason they need to do that is they can go and evaluate how they were doing historically against the market. They could also go and look at, let's say, how they're doing with fairly recent orders when you get down to the portfolio trader level. And we also have the ability for an individual trader to look at orders and how they're doing right now. And increasingly what we want to get to is be able to further evolve those insights so that we can help provide more recommendations and insights into how upon which we feel that the likelihood of how they'll trade going into the future. So
in terms of volume, you talk about billions of trade volumes that you guys manage and monitor every day, right?
That's right. That's right. So in comparison to the cryptocurrency space, in terms of the North American trading space, most of our data, practically all of it, comes between 9:30 to 4 p.m. That's when the markets are generally open. Most of that trading data comes in what we call the open between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, and around the close at 3:30 to 4, where you get the so-called crooked smile, where you get an uneven distribution of data that's submitted on a daily basis. Typically process about 750 million records per day. Of that, what we have historically now is about 146 billion quotes of what prices people thought they could get in the market if they were to trade. We do 26.5 billion trades that we have stored so far. We do 3 billion foreign exchange rates markers that are captured as well. And what that's used for is to normalize orders that are trading across currencies against a common currency, so you can compare apples to apples, the price of an order against one geography and one currency against another. And what that largely comes from is we generate 9.5 billion in rising market benchmarks that are used against the market as a whole. And those benchmarks are also applied against the orders that the clients are entering into our system, primarily via flat files, which they'll provide to us, and also via the fixed protocol, if they wish us to start processing their orders more in real time.
Awesome.
Right? And the use of that is everything from trading performance, portfolio management, down to individual executions and regulatory requirements that people may have to ensure that they're getting the best prices available at the time they're executing their trades.
Gotcha. So Colin, I want to stay with you. Can you double click a little bit on this trade platform that you talked about? How does the platform enable this? And from a data perspective, what are some of the challenges or requirements that you guys were trying to navigate?
Sure. Yeah, so we go from usually from the strategists, or what's also known as the best execution committees, that what they will typically do is they'll look at orders over a long period of time. They may look at everything from a quarter up to 1 year. and very rarely will they go beyond 1 year if they needed to. In terms of the order volume that they're looking at, it's typically 1 million to 100 to 10,000 orders. It will range between the two depending on the size of the client. When you're talking 1 million, you're getting to some of the larger institutional trading spaces. On 10,000 orders, you're typically looking at about 12 to 13 million fills that clients would have put into the market, right? Again, that time frame is all configurable depending upon if someone wants to look at a quarter versus a year versus comparing the current year versus the previous year. Right, so to be able to generate that data, what we've done is we pre-compile and pre-generate the analytics against their orders and to be able to merge them together rather than trying to build that all in real time, because that wouldn't be feasible, right?
So that's the historical. Yeah. You guys go much beyond that, right? You guys go into the real-time periphery as well.
We do from historical, then we start moving into something more recent time frame, which is typically from 1 day to 1 week. So when we talked about the strategists that were there earlier, looking at quarter by quarter or year by year, this is when you get to some of the more recent time frames, this is more of your portfolio trader that's actively trading in the market over a bit longer time frame, right? Or maybe some of the head traders on the desks of floors of those actually producing those trades. Typically, they're looking at between 1 and 10,000 orders, and this is where they could look at, it's enough orders to be able to look at the orders as a whole, to be able to compare, say, how those orders have compared against one another, right? But if they wish to drill down and look at a particularly problematic segment or individual order, they're able to do so. Typically, they would look for outliers and say, for a particular benchmark, you've seen an order with particularly poor performance, right? Or they would look at a basket of orders generated with a certain algorithmic trading pattern or set of brokers that were used that they may have had either poor performance, so they want to delve into why that's happened. They could also look into it from the perspective of good performance, so because sometimes you want to do more of that. It shouldn't always be about what's going poorly. You should look at what's going well too. And then that leads to the next part of our application, which is what's happening right now in real time. So when we say real time, I mean an order can be traded either instantaneously in that it only has 1, 2 fills, so it exists in the market for a very short time, up to typically a day. A day for us goes from 9:30 to 4 o'clock. What we do is that as that market data comes off the wire from our providers, what we will do is that we'll look to ingest that data, and then that data needs to be available to us right then and there so that we could reevaluate the order as it's continuing to be worked on over the day and continue to update our benchmarks and analytics at that individual order level. And what this will allow the trader to do is that they can go and say, what's going well with my order, what's not going well. If there's a particular order I want to look at, I have the ability to do that, and potentially to say, if it's going well, keep doing what I'm doing. If it's not going well, potentially make some adjustments, resubmit another order, or cancel it altogether.
Awesome.
Right. All of this is powered by SingleStore.
I mean, that seems like it's a data-intensive process. You're looking at, real time, recent times, and historical, right? Able to do all of that in the same platform for your customers. So that very, very, very interesting. Jerry, I want to switch to you and hear a little bit more about how, in terms of double click on the Daily Vest platform, what do you guys enable customers to do? And then also some of the specific data challenges or requirements that you are looking to solve for.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So our customers, as I mentioned, are financial service providers. We have about $664 billion of data online with 15 million participants, and that's growing every quarter by about 10% in terms of participants. The key thing about our platform is that, or one of the key things is that we store no personally identifiable information, so no PII. This is very important for our customers because they're very sensitive about any personal information for their customers being out there. So what we do is we make sure that stays in their data center, and we have a translation layer which takes care of that to make sure that everything in our system is not identifiable to us. When they look at the data, of course, they can identify it because it goes back through the translation layer and they can see it. So what we allow them to do is really we provide a real-time user interface that allows their users to drill down into the data to apply wide range of filters to look at the data in the way that they need to see it. We provide the dashboards like we saw earlier, which are really driven in part by the real-time system and in part by key plan metrics that we generate at the beginning of the month. And we also provide them the option of takeaways, like, for example, we have what we call the curated report, where one of the things that our customers really want to do is to be able to go and see their customers, who are the plan sponsors, the companies that are actually providing the finance for the pension plans, and whose employees are also, of course, also financing them. They want to be able to go to their customers and provide them with reports which will show them the health of the various plans. So we provide that in an editable format so that it provides the data that is the analysis of the data that's stored in our system, but it also allows them to mark it up in ways that will be helpful to their customers, knowing the specific business needs of an individual customer. So that's really what we're providing to our customers, is that kind of high-level view of the large amount of data that they have in our system to provide nuggets of business intelligence that they can then pass on to their customers and help them to perform better.
Very, very, very interesting. So Colin talked about real-time trade analytics and recommendations. Jerry's use case from DailyVest is around real-time retirement plan performance and insights for customers. So Michael, I want to switch to you and hear a little bit more about double-click on digital asset research, your key products, and then, in terms of what are some of the specific data challenges or requirements that you guys were faced with?
Sure, and I think you have a pretty good slide for that. So one of the challenges is, if you think about a little bit of echo on the line, if you think about something that would do a network analysis of all transactions that are on a chain, and we could be talking about tens of billions, and we also provide a 1-second price right now, which is on the Bloomberg terminal as of a few weeks ago. We actually calculate the 1-second price and sort of everything in between. There's a lot of data coming in, a lot of queries happening at the same time, and it's hard to keep track of in a consistent way. So it was especially challenging given that the data that we collect from exchanges, we like to do in duplicate, so we can have a few processes and they're not reliant on each other. When we were in MySQL, when I started at DAR, which was now almost a year ago, it had a hard time, MySQL had a hard time deduplicating and then allowing others to query it. So if there were 4 or 5 or 6 pricing engines running against it at the same time as it was updating, there were all kinds of exclusive locks, and we'd get backed up, and occasionally it would go down, or maybe not that occasionally, it was probably every few days. SingleStore handles that extremely well. So at this point, we're able to collect on the slide where we showed 140 million trades. Those are in duplicate, so we collect around 70 million, and that number's actually even grown in the past week, probably more like 80 million with the current market volatility. But we're able to gather all this exchange data, normalize it, so we can put all of the BTC, ETH, and the XBT, EUR together and call that all BTC. We're able to consume it in duplicate, dedupe it, normalize it, load it in the database, and feed it to our pricing engine, in most cases in under 1 second now, which is pretty amazing. And it's all available where our data scientists will be running queries against that data set at the same time. So we are, and during all of this, you might think we're spending more. Our cost has actually gone down by about 50% versus what we were spending on MySQL. And we're able to query the data as it's going. So when we were in MySQL, I couldn't check for things that I was worried about as the CTO, like when did we last get data from this exchange and what's the trend? And I can actually run queries like that as we're going, as all these things are running. It's also the ability to have a managed service has been really helpful to us. So, unlike a lot of the other markets, the crypto space is 24/7. We don't have any time we can have downtime. So our real-time prices need to run all the time. And you know, that was also challenging in MySQL, where things would happen in the environment and we would be down. We can't afford that, and we've you know, the managed service has worked out quite well for that. I think the other thing is sort of speed to market. So we found the pipelines in particular especially useful. We can decide we want to pick up something new that we haven't been consuming before, and you know, even though I'm the manager, I'm the one that actually writes the pipelines myself, because they're pretty straightforward to use, and in some cases in minutes I can have a new one going in production and loading tens of millions of whatever it is per day.
So you're basically looking for highly performant engine that can do real-time ingest, real-time analytics, and you said all of that in under a second, and doing that 24/7 in a managed format. So that's amazing, by the way. So thank you for that, Michael. That's really compelling. I want to switch gears a little bit and hear a little bit more about your individual journeys, and how did you get started, and then why did you choose SingleStore? I think you covered some of those points, but Jerry, I want to start with you around how, what was your journey like? How did you get started? And then why did you end up choosing SingleStore for powering your application?
Sure, absolutely. Well, so DailyVest had been using Azure SQL for some years before we switched to SingleStore. What we were finding was that performance was okay with Azure SQL. We didn't really have any real complaints about performance, but what we were noticing was that the costs were just rapidly rising. As we got more and more data from our customers, Azure SQL costs were just increasing highly. So we wanted to be able to increase number of customers that we had, but we wanted to also control costs. So what we did was we evaluated a number of different database service providers, and we had certain requirements. We're a 100% analytical workload. We do not ingest any data in real time. We do monthly data ingests for most customers. So what was really important to us is to be able to have great performance for analytical workloads. So it was very important for us, for example, to have column store tables, and SingleStore provides column store tables, which are vastly better performance than row store tables for analyzing large amounts of data. Now, in fairness, Azure SQL also has column store tables, but this also needs to be there for any replacement that we found for Azure SQL. So what we found when we started to evaluate SingleStore was that, in fact, although we'd been kind of reasonably happy with Azure SQL performance, the performance was vastly better. I mean, we were seeing in general probably about a 30% better performance from our store procedures. In some cases, there were some outliers with about 90% better performance, and even in fact some of our operations were many times faster. For example, data ingestion was about 20 times faster than it was in SQL Server. So there was immediately there were performance benefits which we had not actually really expected, which greatly exceeded any expectations that we might have had, and also our speed of analysis was much greater. And what that allowed us to do was to roll out new features for our customers. So an increase in performance for us meant that we could then afford to do more analysis after ingestion, and therefore roll out value adds for our customers, which we would not really have been able to add with SQL Server. We knew that we wanted a managed service because we didn't want to be managing our own clusters. And we knew that we wanted to stay in Microsoft Azure cloud because our customers had already okayed having their data in that cloud. So we knew we wanted a cloud native database, and that's definitely SingleStore. We wanted a distributed database. We began to realize after we went with SingleStore, because of the better performance that we were seeing, we perhaps for the future would want multimodal, and I know that SingleStore supports that, but we wanted it to have a relational foundation, because relational database is the fundamental basis of our business. So we ended up saving about 30% overall over Azure SQL. And we got the column store tables that we wanted, but we also got much better performance, and we were blown away by the technical support, because dealing with SingleStore, very often tech support was actually proactive before we even noticed that there was a problem. The problem was fixed. SingleStore opened a ticket, told us about it, and said, "Can we close this now because we found this problem and fixed it for you?" And that was just amazing. So so we've been really happy. You know, it's allowed us to expand the features that we add to our customers and also to see better performance. So that's great.
Awesome. So 20x improvement in ingestion capabilities, 90% improvement in performance in some cases, and then 35% cost benefits, reduced total cost of ownership. That all sounds really exciting. And
Yeah,
you know,
it was great. It was really
yeah.
great. You know, we also saw some really, there were some hidden benefits also to going with SingleStore, which was, you know, as a SQL developer, one of the things that I found frustrating with Azure SQL was that we'd be tweaking queries from month to month as the data ingested changed. So for example, we would be adding join hints. One month we'd perhaps add a hash join hint for a particular query, and then we'd ingest data the following month, and we'd think we need to retweak this query, and it turned out what we needed to do was to remove the hash join. And so, you know, we don't have that kind of variability with SingleStore. We have much more predictability in the kind of code that's going to be highly performant. And the other thing what I noticed was, Vijay, if I can just mention this too, is, you know, with SQL Server, you can't really predict whether you're going to be better off with common table expressions, CTEs, or whether you're better off with a temp table. So what we ended up with was a mishmash of approaches to the code, where we'd have one stored procedure, which would be a temp table in one place, and then we go into some CTEs. And you know, it was very hard to predict. In fact, it was impossible to predict which would be the better approach. With SingleStore, it's absolutely consistent that you really need to use CTEs and get rid of temp tables where you can, which I think is great because that's far more elegant. But it also means that you can predict performance and spend less time tweaking your queries and spend more time on business logic, which I think is a real win.
Yeah, that's all fascinating. I'd love to hear for a second about that migration, like how you got rid of all those temp tables, because that doesn't sound easy.
No, it was long. We had about, at that time, we had about 95 stored procedures, and it was my job to port them. And yeah, so, you know, at first I thought I was going to have to analyze each one and see where I was going to put the temp tables and where I was going to use CTEs. And it turned out, no, that's not how it went at all. It became a predictable task of converting all the temp tables to CTEs, which was a pleasure, quite frankly, as a SQL developer, to get rid of the temp tables.
Awesome. Just a quick note to the audience. If you have questions for Jerry, Michael, and Colin on these use cases and how they're doing this today, feel free to post that in the Q&A section, and we'll definitely try and cover that later as part of the talk track. Okay. But that really interesting, Jerry. Thank you for that. Thank you for that update. I want to switch gears. Switch to Michael. Michael, I would love to hear from you. What was, you mentioned a little bit about your journey, but can you double click a little bit on where you guys started? What was your journey like? What are some of the roadblocks that you hit, and then why? From your perspective, why was SingleStore the solution for you?
So I knew pretty quickly that MySQL just wasn't going to be a great solution for us. So started experimenting with both Snowflake and SingleStore at the same time. And we used a firm called DataSleek, who was very helpful in both getting our MySQL to be more stable and helping us come up with an environment that would be better, that we could have capacity and roll out new features. Unfortunately, with Snowflake, their pricing transparency just wasn't there, and we got a big surprise the first month we went to use it. So that became a non-starter for us. And we also found that while they had a very high compression rate, their query speeds were not much better than MySQL. They were a little better, not much better. When we started using SingleStore, we saw query speeds go up by thousands of fold, and probably just by having an appropriate shard key, and like the others have said, using a column store database across our enormous data sets did most of the trick, but just a huge amount of benefit. And when we saw that our cost would actually go down, really wasn't too much of a decision to migrate everything. I think the other thing for us is because we were on MySQL, most of my applications, so we run in the order of 120 EC2 instances, and all of them are in the database to some extent. And we're expecting MySQL. SingleStore supports MySQL out of the box, so the vast majority didn't need to do anything other than change the connection string, and made my migration a lot simpler than probably some of the others you've heard about today.
Yeah, and so that's really interesting. And you mentioned the fact that, I think you mentioned this earlier, like with Aurora and with the MySQL version, you guys were having outages every other day. There was a lot of firefighting, and it would just, the queries would just not execute, and it was like painfully slow due to contention issues, right?
It was, and our outages are maybe even more painful than they might seem. So if we're collecting in real time from all the exchanges and we're trying to store it in the database and it's not able to be stored, I remember one very painful night where we had an outage at about 1 in the morning. The team was all up on a call. We were out for about a half hour, and we spent a good 10 hours trying to recover the data that we weren't able to capture from the exchanges. There are hundreds of exchanges that we consume from, and they all have most of them will offer history if you can figure out how to get it. It's unique to each exchange how they'll do it. Some of them you have to paginate back through time and index what you've gotten and when. And I'm glad that's behind me. We haven't had an outage like that, and I'll knock something because of course anything's possible. But it's allowed us to bring on a lot more clients. It's allowed us to price a lot more assets. Getting out of those outages. I tried to block that out. So
yeah, and you mentioned you went from like what was 20 to 30 million orders to almost 140 million today, right? And growing, right? And that's one of the, and doing that at much enormous 100,000x better performance for those type of volumes that you guys are seeing.
Yeah, and one of the other things that really helped us is we moved to a message-based architecture for the things that have to go really quickly. We use Confluent Cloud for that. And by the way, we're all AWS, so being cloud native was important to us, but also being something that would work with AWS made sense. So another thing I probably should have mentioned earlier, the bottomless aspect of SingleStore, that I can just keep adding more and more and more. As long as I have the compute and memory, it'll just spill over to S3. Is also very valuable to us.
Yeah, so for the audience, what Michael is referring to bottomless is really the separation of storage and compute for both transactions and analytics. So you literally have like unlimited storage, but still with exceptional, millisecond performance for all of your data. Really interesting. And then Michael, you also touched upon some of the ingestion capabilities and the fact that the pipelines help you get this data up fast, and you can roll those out in less than 10 minutes for some of your ingestion pipelines, right?
That's true. Some of the new things we've done are we started consuming the order book. So if anyone on the call has a Bloomberg terminal, you'll see that we provide best bid and ask on the prices. So that was something we were consuming, but we weren't streaming. So we had to add streaming capability, which meant consuming it into SingleStore with that same amount of speed. And I remember that one we were done with in probably 10 minutes. We were able to model the table, look at the JSON object, and get it to start to consume. And the batches are like blazing fast.
Cool. Very interesting. Thank you, Michael. Colin, I want to come back to you and just understand your journey around how, what was your journey? How did you guys get started? What were you looking for? And then why did you end up, choosing SingleStore as your database to power your data-intensive application?
Oh, sure. And I must say, hearing the experiences of Jerry and Michael, it brings back memories of me too, having to rewrite temporary tables and hash joins and the whole bit. So I think our journey for Spacetime was a little different in that we wound up going with SingleStore. It was called MemSQL, I think, at the time, off the bat. But I'll tell you a little bit about the journey. So first is, I was born and bred a SQL Server guy. with the on-premise equipment about 25 years ago, give or take. I think that was shortly after the Sybase, when I think Sybase was acquired by Microsoft, I think is when I started working with it. Trouble we had when we took a look at some of those on-premise versions of the software, it's a good software, but it gets fiendishly expensive as you look to continue to add nodes. And talk about complexity if you don't have a Microsoft Active Directory in your environment. So we said, well, in today's day and age with the cloud environment, well, that didn't make sense. So our next one that we looked at, because again, SQL Server guys, is that we looked at the hosted version of SQL Server with Amazon RDS, right? That part was great, you know, is that you could spin up that database very, very quickly. Trouble that we had with it was that the Amazon exposes extended store procedures, what's used for your asynchronous fast data loading capabilities, analogous to the single store pipelines. And telling if a file was loaded or not and being able to put another file in to be loaded, you just get all sorts of concurrency problems and blocks and limitations and errors where, you know, it takes a couple minutes for a file to kick up and go in, and you have to actually wait for that couple of minutes before you can actually submit another file, which could then start the cycle again. And you're just waiting way too long to ingest this data. My own experience with MySQL, I did this for about 9 or 10 years with 4 geographic locations, 2 in Canada and 2 in the US. It's a pretty good distributed database if you know how to set the replication correctly, right? That we did, I think it was Texas, Las Vegas, and Montreal and Toronto, right? But a lot of times the support is left up to the community, right? So if you actually have a problem with it and it's not working, then you go to the community to help you fix it, or you like rely upon yourself to help fix it, right? So we said, I kind of want to look for a vendor that actually does database work and actually has people that professionally work on it and you could talk to, right? So we said, well, let's put MySQL to the side then. Then we looked at Amazon Redshift. That's a very good database. You know, in terms of a cloud-only provider environment, you know, you could write into Postgres dialect, you can write the queries fairly quickly, right? And it'll perform. There's an issue with it though in terms of our use case, which is that we need the flexibility to have the same database software either be able to be installed on premises, in this case, day and age, a cloud environment that we control. With some of our clients, we may have a requirement with them that we need to install the database in their cloud or their premises. And we may also have the ability with some clients to use the single store managed service as well. Mm-hmm. So with Redshift being a cloud-only provider, the on-premise, our cloud use case, and having the clients on-premise use case didn't fit, right? So, and that led us to SingleStore. I can install it on my cloud. I can install it in SingleStore. I can install in the client. It's the same database language. It's the same database engine. I don't have to differentiate. And what we found was, so when you met that requirement, we started looking at some of the other factors we had to close off in selecting SingleStore. First, it's performant database. When I'm working with some of the row store data for some of our OLTP workloads, that's some of the rows that are under tables with under 30 million records or so, I find it very fast, right? Don't have to use index hints very much. I have used them for some of the locking, but other than that, I haven't had to provide hints and the queries work well. When we talked, my other co-panelists have talked about the column stores. Like right now, our data today, it's about 22 terabytes compressed in terms of our 4 nodes with the replicated spares, right? That would be well over 100 terabyte if it was uncompressed. So that it'll take a lot of the queries very fast, as we could pull specific column or segments in something that's 1/5 of the size on disk that it would be normal otherwise. I've already talked about and touched on the flexible deployment models. Haven't really seen this kind of ease of use with SingleStore, other than with SingleStore, in terms of being able to deploy the database engine in 3 different ways, right? And also being able to expand the capacity of the infrastructure in near real time. We had a case where we had to load a year's worth of equity-based market data. And with the original environment that was provisioned to us, it was going to take 7 to 8 days to complete that in order to be able to conduct a test. I worked with your engineering group. We were able to expand the infrastructure with a couple clicks of your GUIs, and then that data was imported in less than a day. And then once the data was imported, and we had all the data loaded as we needed, we were then able to scale it back without it being a SIG. All right. We've talked about easy data ingestion. I mean, Michael's touched on creating the pipelines. Gary, I'm not sure if you have as well, but I find them pretty easy to use. I find them easy to extend with a store procedure that could be connected to those pipelines. And I mean, we've looked at other third-party providers that do that kind of streaming bridge between, let's say, an external provider of data with your database itself. I never want to get another call again with any provider where they say, well, it looks good on my end, right? Being able to use the pipelines directly within SingleStore is a huge advantage, because then I know it's either me or it's SingleStore. There's nobody else in between that could say it's okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the important part is getting the data in, and if you
Yes.
the robust and the more fast you can get that done, the better for the user.
And finally on that is reliable support. I mean, it's when everything's working, that's great. Everyone loves it when everything's working. Unfortunately, the world's not perfect. So when I've had to reach out to support, I feel supported. Like I have humans to talk to, I have humans to talk to fairly quickly. With other database vendors and other providers, you just can't get a human on the phone until it's gone way too late. And I've never had a problem with that with SingleStore.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Colin. That was really comprehensive. Appreciate it. I want to do a quick round robin, and talk a little bit about. So we talked about the journey where you guys started. What made you choose SingleStore, but then let's quickly talk about some of the business impacts. So how has this affected your business? How has this affected your scale? How has this affected your customers? And how has this really affected your business at the end of the day? Okay, so Michael, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about some of the business impact. I think you touched upon some of them earlier, but can you maybe double click on what are some of the business impacts for digital asset research after doing this transition? What are some of the big things that you can do now that you couldn't do before?
Yeah, I think the really big one is just being able to do everything we do in under a second. So a real kind of streaming process wasn't possible before this in our old infrastructure. So then we had a real-time price, which was every 15 seconds, which is still a lot. It's still a lot of data. Our look back can be 20 minutes of trades to find anomalies in the exchanges. So even doing that every 15 seconds and doing a volume weighted price at the end was a lot, but now we can do 1 second pricing with relative ease. So we can be the pricing provider on the Bloomberg terminal. We're also able to expand the number of clients we have by quickly adding little features here or there. We're at about 25 clients now versus we had about 4 when I started. Some are very, very chunky, but those are the 2 main ones. But I think being able to sleep at night and being able to myself think about how to make the platform better rather than just patching the gaps has been quite meaningful. I'll also add the shout out to the support team. So, I wasn't a good pipeline developer in the beginning, the first few times I tried, and I did things that were pretty backwards. And support was, they weren't condescending. They were understanding that I had done something boneheaded and pointed it out and helped me to fix it and was able to get it running. So I think being able to sleep at night, maybe you didn't have that in mind is one of the selling points, but that's been one.
That's priceless, right? Like being able to sleep at night, fantastic support, great performance, and all of that at about half the cost that you guys were structured earlier on, right? Like with Aurora, you're probably thinking double the cost with outages and stuff, and going from there, 1000x better performance, being able to sleep better with 50% lower cost. Those are some amazing business impacts. So thank you, Michael. Jerry, I want to switch to you and can you talk us through what are some of the business impacts that Daily Vest was able to accomplish by after moving to?
Absolutely. First, I'd like to echo what Michael said about the understanding of technical support at SingleStore. I also did some boneheaded things. First of all, coming to SingleStore, I was an under-the-hood SQL Server developer. I'd been working with SQL Server for about as long as Colin described earlier. So I was someone who kind of over the years had acquired a kind of a fairly good understanding of what things were going to work and what was not going to work in SQL Server. It's just not that complicated in a SingleStore. You know, there were things that I was doing in MySQL because I mean, when I say in MySQL, in the SQL that I wrote, because I knew that certain things were going to be helpful to SQL Server. They just weren't necessary. In fact, they were a hindrance. And so there were some things like, you know, overuse of temp tables, that sort of thing, which caused big problems when I came to SingleStore's environment. And tech support was very understanding about it. So anyway, but to talk about what the benefit to DailyVest has been for moving to SingleStore, the biggest thing has been the ability to add features. And for us, I guess the most striking feature that we've added has been benchmarking. The thing is that when you look at retirement plans, there's an awful lot of data to look at. If you want to compare one plan against another, that's very difficult to do. But if you want to compare one plan against 15 of its peers or 25 of its peers, you just can't do that in real time. That's the thing. So if you want to know, if you want to look at the distributions from one plan and say, is this a normal kind of a level of distributions this month from this plan? Let's look at some similar plans. You would never be able to do that in a time that would be acceptable to the user. So what we have done as a result of switching to SingleStore is that we have greatly increased the compute intensity of what we do after we load the data. We pre-compute a lot more key plan metrics, KPMs, and those are the basis for our cross-plan analysis at runtime. So we're able to, at runtime, show our users data which would never be able to be computed from scratch because we pre-computed a lot of it after ingestion, and even that pre-computation was too heavy duty for when we were using Azure SQL. SingleStore's enabled us to do that.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you, Jerry. Why don't we now shift to Colin? I want to round this out and just would love to hear from you, Colin, on what are some of the specific business impacts that you guys were able to drive by moving to SingleStore?
Yeah, well, I think in our case, it's a little different because we kind of started on SingleStore, but we'll talk a little more about it. So if you could advance the slide.
Just give me 1 second. I'm having some technical issues with my end.
No problem. Or I could start using it from memory. Right. So, yes. So in our case, oh, there you go. Yeah. So in terms of our ingestion rates, because again, we have customers that go from historical up to real time in terms of their use cases. So we do we're able to get the 750 million rows a day. They just kind of get imported. I don't have to worry about it, and they get imported near real time. All right. So within, you know, basically as almost as quick as a day is written to Amazon S3, it gets imported to the database. I think that's great. Right. Whenever we're looking to retrieve our market data for what we call the benchmarking of our orders, for an individual query, and there's a few of them that are made in terms of benchmarking, most of them are against sub 2 second level. Right. You know, when you're talking with a database that's got over 140 billion rows in it for the quotes itself, to me, that's a lot. And being able to query a database of that size and pull something out as long as your sort keys are in place in 2 seconds, it's pretty good. You know, our order results, cache data, and the lookup data, I'll kind of put those together and all that and saying, for the stuff that's small and the stuff that's in a row store that's in memory, I'm generally able to pick it up when I need it and use it. Right? Very rarely do I have any of those kind of queries go beyond 1 second unless I'm aggregating millions of rows in terms of a large aggregated data set. And finally, our uptime. I like to sleep too, just like Michael does. And so I've really had, what I looked at says we've actually had 100% uptime in our database environment, excluding a specific architectural issue on our cluster that we worked with your team to better understand in terms of the pipeline usage and able to prevent that from happening again. And then once we did that, we haven't had any out of memory errors since then. So, I mean, having a database that's available to you and just the data when you need it, that's pretty important if you're going to do a lot of analytics in a business.
Fantastic, fantastic. Wow, this has been such an engaging and lively discussion, and thank you to all three of you. Why don't we open this up to question and answers? So Matt, I know that I already see a number of questions coming in. Why don't we just get started with the Q&A for the team then?
That sounds great. Yes, so the first question we've got from the audience is for Michael. Question is, how long did the deployment take for digital asset research when switching to SingleStore?
It was weeks at most. So we weren't using any temp tables. We didn't do any optimization of what the data models were. So it was really just a lift and shift exercise and import the history later. So we had a bit of a period where a lot of the historical trades were still in MySQL, and my data scientists were using that. My pricing engines were on SingleStore, and we were able to import all that history and turn off MySQL, and the whole thing lasted maybe 2 or 3 weeks. The applications, of course, we had to test them all. You can't be completely sure even though it's the same, it supports the MySQL engine natively. We tested them all, but we didn't luckily encounter any issues. So it was a few weeks long. Within a month, we had MySQL turned off once we made the decision.
Good stuff.
I don't know if you can count. I'm using all the caveats because I can imagine a scenario where you're relying on something else that is different in a non-column store database. Like if you need foreign key constraints, for example, you'd have to have another way around that with your column store, and something that SingleStore doesn't support. So, not guaranteeing that everyone's experience will be like that, but ours was blazingly fast.
Good stuff. Thank you, Michael. I think this next question came in during Jerry's talk, so I'll direct this question to Jerry. How easy was this to scale for you after setting up? What was the impact on uptime, if any?
There was no impact on uptime. We had no uptime problems with Azure SQL, and we have no uptime problems with SingleStore either. In terms of scalability, I mean, we haven't really had to scale up yet, but in SingleStore's managed environment, it would really just be a matter of saying that we wanted more servers, and just having the cluster expanded in that way. So yeah.
Good stuff. That makes a lot of sense. I think this next question is for Colin. What have you noticed about the performance parity within SingleStore locally versus within the managed environment?
I'd say that in many cases, I think they're similar, right? If you have the same number of child nodes and aggregators as you do on premise versus in the managed service, it was roughly the same, right? I think, but the key benefits with the managed service is that, again, you can add some additional nodes much more easily than I could with the on-premise environment, right? I would say overall with the managed service, probably was a good 10 to 15% faster, but it wasn't like it was double or triple or anything like that, right? So fairly close within a tolerance. I would have had to let the environments run longer in the managed service compared to on-premise to get something more accurate than that, but let's say within 10, 15%.
Good stuff. A lot more questions, but I think we just have time for one more. So I'm going to grab this one. It's for Michael. Quick question about how fast ingestion is done within SingleStore as compared to MySQL.
I mean, it's probably in the order of thousands of times faster. I mean, it's streaming in, so I can actually see. One of the things we didn't talk about, and I think one of the others mentioned as a challenge, is seeing how your ETL is performing over time is pretty well done in SingleStore. There are queries that they give you that are canned where you can see every batch and see how it's operating and find all your errors and see the row that caused the error. But my batches, because I'm streaming from Confluent Cloud, by and large, where I need real-time data, will only have a few trades and it'll just run. My batch interval is 0, so it always runs, but it'll do like 12 trades or 19 trades. They're really small batches, and they're running in something like 7 milliseconds some of the time and 12 milliseconds. They're nothing. They are so unbelievably fast. you know, in MySQL, I could see that there'd be an operation on the database that would take an exclusive lock, and it would just back everything up, and the update process could be so far back in the queue that it could take minutes, and that would lead to an outage, because then the pricing engine would collapse on itself. So it's probably in the order of thousands of times faster. I think the pipelines especially are highly performant. The direct inserts were also faster, not quite as performant. So we've actually gone to pipelines for every single update that we do.
Good stuff. I see that we are over time, so I'll wrap this up quickly. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for a wonderful webinar today. Thank you so much to our audience. We're going to send to everyone a follow-up email with today's recording and a link to our managed service free trial. Also importantly, we're offering each user $500 in free SingleStore credits. You can start a full workload today. Please check out bit.ly/fintech-panel. I've just put this in the chat in order to redeem this offer that's in the chat. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.